It's a really good description of kind of how our subconscious works. And the quote goes like this: "Our brain will choose a familiar hell over unfamiliar heaven every single time." My familiar hell is my nervous system being blasted and in survival mode.
Hello and welcome to Real Men Feel. I'm your host, author, coach, and healer Andy Grant. You can learn more about me at theandygrant.com. On this show, we have conversations that most men are not having, but that all men and the women who love them can benefit from. Today, I'm joined by Aaron Gambel, an impact-driven life coach and men's group facilitator whose mission is to lower the rate of male suicide by creating safe spaces for emotional growth, healing, and connection. Drawing from his own journey through divorce, fatherhood, and transformation, Aaron helps men rewrite their stories and reclaim their power. And if you're ready to continue conversations like this, join our private community, Authentic AF, at realmenfeel.org/group. Let's do it. Hello, Aaron, and welcome to Real Men Feel.
Thank you for having me, Andy. Appreciate it.
So, Aaron, we are both members of a group, a club that I don't think really anybody wants to be part of. Can you tell me about that turning point in your own life where you really decided changes need to be made?
Yes. For me, that moment happened 5 days after my 43rd birthday. I took my kids camping, and for some reason, something inside of me was just felt like I'm not the person that I am meant to be, that I had lost myself. And it came in this realization that I wasn't happy in the life that I had, and got home from camping and ended up getting into an argument with my wife at the time. Normal argument, something that, happens often, but something inside me cracked. And I went upstairs and I grabbed a bottle of Xanax, and I looked down at that bottle of pills, 25 or 30 inside, and I thought to myself, I could just down all of these and never wake up. And as I was lifting that bottle to my mouth, an image of my two kids, who at the time were 5 and 7, popped into my brain. They were downstairs in this image, laughing and playing Uno in my living room. That image literally saved my life. I thought to myself in that moment, I cannot leave this earth and leave them without a father. I would be doing way more damage to them if I left. And the next thing I had to do after that was make what I like to call the biggest decision that I've ever made as a man. And that was to put myself into the hospital. So I called a friend and had him pick me up, said goodbye to my family, told my kids that I was going off onto a job, which is something I normally did in the film industry. I would leave for weeks on end to go to a random city or state to film a movie or a TV show. And I checked myself into UCLA Medical Center, into the behavioral health unit. I spent 5 days at UCLA. 2 days of that 5 day, 2 days into that, my wife came to visit me, and she didn't come to visit me to offer support or care or whatever. She came to tell me that she's filing for divorce. And to be very honest and clear with you, I was already at a pretty low place. That was a breaking point for me. But it also at the same time, like, are you familiar with the Dark Night of the Soul or the Joseph Campbell's Hero's Journey?
All too.
That was my Dark Night of the Soul. That moment. I was at rock bottom, and I felt like after that, based on how I grew up, getting a divorce was going through the rock bottom floor. You can't get any deeper. At the same time, that was the beginning of my Phoenix Rising. Because what happened after that is I spent the next 3 days at the UCLA Medical Center, and then the doctors suggested that I go to a treatment center, a residential treatment center, where was all men, It's a place where you go, and it's a bridge between having a mental breakdown and regaining back into society. And I spent 25 days there. And I like to call that experience my mental health college experience because every day, 6 days a week, from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m., every hour on the hour, we sat in this decrepit old living room of this beat up treatment center, and we learned a new modality of psychology. I learned DBT, ACT, CBT. I also learned about emotional regulation. We learned about breath work, about yoga, about gratitude, journaling. The list goes on and on. I mean, I could name all the acronyms in psychology because we learned every one of them. And it really was like a college experience. And I sat in that beat up living room, and I took copious amounts of notes. I wrote more than I've ever written in my entire life in 43 years up to that point. In those 25 days, I kept every single paper. I absorbed so much of this information because I wanted to figure out how to be the best version of myself. I realized that I am in this dark place. That is not who I am. That's not what I want to be. And Andy, I think we're pretty close in age, right? Like you're in your 40s as well, if I had to guess.
I'm in my 50s.
In 50s. Okay. So we still come from that same kind of latchkey kid upbringing, right? Yeah. So a positive byproduct of the latchkey kid comes a sense of resilience and a sense of what I like to call grit. And I know that I possess that. And this moment that I was in, understanding that I'm not where I want to be, was just another chip to put on my shoulder of a task that I need to overcome. And that's how I looked at it. And I learned everything I possibly could. And I'll be honest with you, a lot of the stuff that I learned there, I do myself because it was amazing and I've shifted my life because of it. I also use that in my coaching. And I teach emotional regulation. I teach, nervous system regulation and an understanding of what your nervous system is doing. It has now become a staple to who I am today and what I do. And I left the film industry, and now I'm working as a coach, as a men's group facilitator, and I'm trying to share what I've learned and what I experienced. So hopefully somebody out there won't have to go through what I went through. Hopefully I can save someone from A, becoming a statistic, or B, having to go through a hospital experience, having to go through putting themselves into, the behavioral health unit, or having to go through that experience. If somebody is close to that and they hear my story and they see that, they can do these things and learn these tools without going through that experience, then I've life goal achieved.
There's a lot to unpack there. So one of the things you mentioned was that night, thinking that you've lost yourself and you weren't happy. So does that mean earlier in your life you were happy? You felt you were on mission and purpose and doing everything right and feeling good about that?
Oh no. But I think in that moment, I was a step closer to purpose. I was just surviving up until that moment. I grew up in a pretty rough environment. My parents were, I like to call them emotionally immature parents. There's an amazing book called Children of Emotionally Immature Parents. First of all, that book was life-changing. It helped me rewrite my story, and it helped me to do what I'm doing now with we are not the stories that we tell ourselves, and how to rewrite, your story. That book had huge influence on me in that way, because I realized that I am high functioning in survival mode. And I've gravitated toward careers that promoted that. And it's just something that is pretty normal to me. There was a quote actually that I heard a couple years ago that I use today, and I kind of live by it. And it's a really good description of kind of how our subconscious works. And the quote goes like this: it's our brain will choose a familiar hell over unfamiliar heaven every single time. My familiar hell is my nervous system being blasted and in survival mode. Because as a child, my parents, I got really good at reading people and being able to read where the emotional level of my parents were in order to understand whether I could say something or not. Because at any moment, it's that walking on eggshells sort of experience. And that started really young. Now, the positive side of that is that if I were to choose to be in the military, I would have been a phenomenal soldier. Because when bullets are flying by, like, I would get ultra focused and do the job at hand. I know that. I gravitated toward careers. My first job, very, very grateful for the person who helped me get to this position. But first job I worked at was in a hospital. I worked as an orderly, and I was like helping people. And then I, moved into the emergency room and was like helping trauma cases and assisting as a medical assistant. And I would work in surgery and work in all these environments. And I believe that was because my body, my brain, my subconscious was gravitating toward that activated nervous system because that's what it knows. That's what's familiar. Now, on the long run of that, it's not very healthy for you. The film industry is also the same thing. Like, film industry's freelance. Every second that we are not filming, you're burning $500,000. And that's the theme of being on a film set is like, you need to go, or we're going to run out of money. And it's very nervous system activating. And I thrived in that environment. To answer your question, no, I didn't know what my purpose was. I wasn't happy. I was just living, and I was living in that blasted nervous system. I was surviving, and I found joy in small ways. And I think, to be honest with you, I would use coping mechanisms that were unhealthy in order to find joy, like drinking or drugs or whatever it may be. Fortunately, I'm very lucky. I don't have an addictive personality, so none of that stuff became a problem. And today, like, I don't, I'm pretty dead sober. I don't drink. I may play around with some microdose of psilocybin or something like that, but I don't do any of the substances that I was doing prior to going into the hospital. And I kind of realized that I can function at a different level completely sober, and I don't have to hide from my past or my traumas. I can face that and understand that. And that's what I really try to teach in my own work now is like, listen, we don't have to run away from that. Mm-hmm. You can face it. You can face that shadow because it's your own shadow and it's your own story, and you have the ability to rewrite that. It's going to take some work and it's not going to be easy, but we can do that.
In your mental health college, you said that you had decided you wanted to be the best version of yourself. For who?
For me. For that inner child in me. It's interesting. That's a really great question, Andy. Like, I was going to therapy prior to that experience, and I was trying to unpack some of my trauma, and it wasn't really working. And I realized that it wasn't working because I was doing it for my family. I was doing it to save my marriage. I was doing it to save my kids because at that time I was operating under this idea that one toxic home is way better than two happy homes. And that divorce was like failure to me. And that I would just be repeating the same childhood traumas that I experienced on my kids. And that was one of the biggest crutches that I had to come to terms with in going through this divorce, going through this experience that I went through, because I just always thought that if I get a divorce, I'm going to fail. I'm going to grow up and my kids are going to get a stepdad that is a piece of crap, and and they're going to live the same life that I lived growing up. And to me, that was ultimate failure. And once I got over that and realized that I have to do this for myself, and when I can heal myself, I can heal that inner child within me, I can heal this body, then I can show up as a good partner. I can show up as a conscious and loving dad. And I can show up in my job as a full-fledged human being and like really give to others, because I can't give to anybody else until I have fixed what's inside of me. And I'm not going to sit here and say that I'm fixed and I'm healed and, like, no, I'm not at all. I'm human. I'm still going through this stuff, but I've taken some big freaking chunks out of that, and enough to know, and I've learned enough to be able to help others take big chunks out of that child, that trauma, or whatever it is.
What inspired you to go from it's finally time to take care of myself to now I want to be of service to others?
That's a really interesting question. I think I've always had that in me. And I think what inspired me was the realization that this is what I'm meant to do. One of the things that pops up for me is a story that I often tell. Is when I was working in the film industry, I was a camera assistant. Like, my job was to pull focus and to make sure it's in focus. So to explain that is, anytime you've watched a movie or a TV show and it kind of goes out of focus for a little bit, and not in a creative way, but in a sort of distracting way, that's somebody in my job messing up. And that was the best they were able to do in the however many takes it took them to get that shot. So I had to be ultra focused on what's happening during the rehearsals, and when the director and the actor are working out what's going to happen on camera. I have to be very aware. And what kept happening to me in the entire time in my 15-year career is there's a lot of stand around waiting time. You're waiting for the actor to get dressed. You're waiting for the lights to get turned on. So my job didn't really start until we were getting closer to actually filming. And what would happen is there'd be these men that, were builders, or the electrician, or, these guys who are old, been working in the film industry forever, never been to therapy, never talked to anybody about any of their personal problems, would come and have a conversation with me, and we would quickly go deep. And then I would be in this deep conversation talking to this person and they'd be telling me these really like personal things that they've never told even their wives. And the entire time I'm looking over going, I really want to be in this conversation, but I really need to pay attention to what's going on over here. And, I had this great camera assistant that I would hire all the time, and we would carry these walkie-talkies and have like the little earpiece in our ear, and he'd get on the walkie-talkie and he'd go, "Hey, Chatty Cathy, come on, we got to get to work." And what I then realized, this is a long sort of convoluted story to say that, like, being of service, having these deep conversations, helping people get through whatever it is they may be getting through, was coming to me while I was doing another job. And it was almost like, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. This job in the film industry is just kind of getting in the way of that. So when I had that realization that this was already happening, I started thinking, like, how can I do this for a living? How can I make a career so I don't have to do the film industry thing anymore, and I can just do what is already coming in my direction? And that's what led me to helping others. And I've just always been that way. I just didn't understand that you could make a job out of that.
So you talk about the importance and the ability we have to rewrite our stories. What part of your story did you need to rewrite first?
The first one, I would say, the first story that I had to rewrite was kind of what I explained earlier, is that I'm not going to repeat the traumas and the generational trauma that I experienced on my kids. Just the fact that I am aware of those is already 50% better than what I grew up in. Like I'm already setting my kids up for success because I know, I'm aware. Getting over the one toxic home versus two happy homes, that was a big one. And then really rewriting the story. Like my story involves a lot of self-worth problems, being heard, being seen, being accepted. I had to understand that I actually have a courageous voice and that my voice can be heard and that I am worthy of stepping into the conversation. And a lot of that came with letting go of the victimhood idea that I was this damaged kid and that it's my parents' fault that I grew up this way and that my parents were the reason why I, have low self-worth, that I don't feel seen or heard. And, they were involved in that, but there's no fault. There's no, like I'm not a victim of my experience. I had my experience. I have the ability to overcome that experience now. And that's what I kind of, involve in rewriting the story. It's like I lived in victimhood for a really long time. And I was really good at diffusing and placing blame and shifting responsibility away from myself and putting it on someone else and putting myself in the victim role. So getting over that and understanding that whatever that happened was 30 years ago and that now I can make a choice as a man to face that or be the victim and not take responsibility for those feelings that that I've been having for 30 years. That was the biggest moment. And once I started going in that direction, everything started to change.
So I know part of your mission is drastically lowering the rate of male suicide. What do you think is the main obstacle in the way for men asking for help?
I think to answer that question, we have to kind of go back to sort of the old school model that most of us men have been sort of programmed into. And I I'm sure you've heard this, and anybody else who's relatively around our age, and even some of the younger guys probably have heard it as well. It's this old mantra of you put your head down, you bury your emotions, you work hard, and you provide for your family. And I think that is kind of a basis for the mind frame that men have been in for generations of even beyond yours. Both of ours. It's this idea that we're not allowed to have emotions. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine about this just the other day, and he said something really poignant that really stuck with me. And he said, the only emotion that a man is really acceptable in society to have is anger. And it's not acceptable in a positive way. But we're not supposed to cry. We're not supposed to have shame. We're not supposed to feel joy. We're not supposed to feel any other emotion, but anger is maybe allowed. For me, that's the reason why we have such a high statistics we have. I also think that, it's not necessarily men's faults. It's kind of like societal programming. I mean, you have these generations of men that were raised by war veterans, who were raised by war veterans, who were raised by war veterans, who all were taught to not express or talk about the things that they experienced, downrange or down in war. And I think that has a ripple effect on every other generation moving forward. You're just taught not to talk about it. You bury that emotion. And what's happening is, I like to question, like, what happens when you can't bury that emotion anymore? What happens when that emotion comes bubbling up and you don't know how to process that emotion? And I think that's the reason why the second leading cause of death for men 45 and under, this is as of 2022, is suicide. And the first leading cause of death is unintentional injury, meaning you could get hit by a car, you could have something fall out of the sky and kill you. You could, have an aneurysm. There's a million different causes of death under unintentional injury. And suicide is just below that. And again, like, I was almost one of those statistics. So for me, like, I want to lower that. And I want to teach men how to A, recognize their emotions, and B, how to process that, and how to be aware that an emotion is coming up, what that feels like in your body.
So is to move from awareness of suicide as an issue to real action about it all about men learning to feel, to express, to get the shit out of them?
Yeah. I think that's the first part of it. Yes, awareness. It's what one of the big mantras that I have in the men's group that I run is we're fixers. We're very analytical. You have an interaction with your partner. In my case, I'll use myself as my partner or my ex-wife or whatever. They'll come with an emotional problem. And the first unconscious thought that us as a man, that I'm as a man, I'm going to just use my own experience, is, okay, how do I fix this? What things do I need to do in order to change this emotion from sorrow or pain or anger to joy? What are the steps that I need to take to do that? But when it comes to being inside within us as men, we need to learn how to actually step out of our minds and into our hearts or into our bodies, because that's where the feeling, that's where the emotion comes from. And it also kind of lines with, there's a great book called The Body Keeps Score. And the idea is that we store our emotions in parts of our body. And if we're not accessing that body, accessing that heart, then we're not ever going to process that emotion. And when I am living in my head and trying to fix this thing and not feeling it, then you're just putting a Band-Aid on a gaping wound.
In your men's group, is there a common fear or hesitation that a guy displays, like at his first visit?
Oh, always. Yes, of course. Always. Shame is a really big thing, I think, for men. I'll use an example. I'm not going to use any names because I like to protect privacy. It's really important in the men's groups, but I can use a generalization and use a name. As one of the guys in the group, he was new. He was a very open gentleman. He was okay with talking about what was going on and the work he's been doing and where he's at and where he's moving. And that was great. For being the first time in the men's group, I was like, okay, this guy's, he's doing the work. But then he mentioned something that was really interesting, where he said, I've had a problem. One of the reasons why I'm here is because I've tried to talk to some of my friends about these situations, and it has hurt friendships where those men aren't able to receive that or to talk about it. And then I'm not, that like they don't want to be friends. They pull back. And what he was describing was a level of shame, of a fear of, if I get vulnerable, how is somebody gonna receive that, and how is that gonna be received? And in that moment, in that I just described, that wasn't received very well. He lost a friend. So it's like you take one step forward, and it's not a great step. You're sliding back 5 steps. Like now as men, it's like, oh, well, we're going to be vulnerable. It's very vulnerable to even share those kind of things. And then extra vulnerable to talk about what it is with another person. And if that person isn't able to receive or hold space for that, it's like, oh, well, I'm never going to talk about that to another person at all. And so I think men's groups are amazing because it's literally the space to have those conversations. we're going in with an agreement that we're not going to judge anybody for anything that they say. We're going to hold space. We're going to support. And 90% of the time, there's at least 1 to 2 other men in that group who are going to raise their hand and say, I'm experiencing that as well. And thank you for saying it right now, because I also feel that way. I also grew up that way. I also have had those same thoughts. And now in that situation, you're not alone. You're now with a group of people who are going through the same thing. And that is true connection. And that's what we're trying to do here. You know, there is a silent epidemic that we talked about a little bit of suicide, but there's also a silent epidemic of loneliness. I like to call it the lone wolf syndrome. You know, most men, I would say a lot of men in particularly in getting into their late 30s and 40s, probably count on one hand how many close friends they have. And then out of those close friends, probably gets down to single digits on how many they can actually talk about deep, like emotional things that are going on. So having a space that you can feel safe to talk to and to open up and to connect with, I mean, it's paramount.
It's funny, not funny, with all the anti-wokeness things that have come about and making fun of, you know, safe spaces and college students needing safe and all this stuff. And it's still, I see it every day, and it's what you're describing. Men need to feel safe somewhere in order to open up.
You know, I'm very fascinated with like masculine and feminine dynamics. And I study a lot of, I don't know if you're familiar with John Weidland. He wrote this great book called From the Core. And he's very big on sacred intimacy and relationships. And, you know, there's this polarity that happens with masculine and feminine. And men usually, you know, it can go both ways. You can have dynamics where a woman is more the masculine and the man is more the feminine. And it's, you know, it's a ever revolving sort of polarity. And I think what happens is, under the normal society and normal programming, us men, we're supposed to provide safety for others. You protect your family, you protect your partner, you provide safety. A woman can open up and be loving and be caring when she feels safe. We are the product of making them feel safe, but we don't actually have anybody to make us feel safe. And there isn't really a conversation about other men helping other men feel safe. So providing a space to be able to do that, it's powerful. I also think, and this doesn't even go with men, this is just people in general. We live in a time with social media, 24-hour news, like all of these things. We get more information than we ever have before in history. And with all the different social media platforms and everybody being encouraged to, you know, speak their voice and show the world who you are, what you're doing, there comes this false sense of connection where you can, like I'll use an example, Andy. I could watch your Instagram or your Facebook or your whatever social media platform that you use and get a sense of like that I know you. We've never had a real conversation. We've never been in the same space together, but I know all the things that you have done based on what you've done. That's not necessarily connection. That's information. But when we get in a room together and we actually sit down and we truly connect, there's an energy that happens in that. And I don't like to use the word healing, but there's a particular energy that happens when you feel connected to someone. So we get this false sense of connection, and that becomes from social media. And now I believe that we're in 2025, we are now coming to a precipice or a pinnacle point where people are looking for connection, in-person connection, as much as they can, because we've all been living in a world of false connection. So that's where men's groups come in. Like almost every single time in a men's group, the ones that I've attended, ones that I've led, that I've been a part of, everyone feels connected. Most of the men feel connected. Like if you were to go around a circle and say, what's the one word that you could state after having this experience? Half of the people are going to say, I feel connected.
And in my experience, that can even be the very first meeting for people.
Yeah. Oh, 100%.
Yeah. Often guys are surprised how different, better they feel from just attending a single meeting.
Yeah. I mean, imagine what would happen if you start going consistently.
Yeah. So if there's a man listening stuck in shame and anger, perhaps even hopelessness, what would be the first small step that you recommend?
I think the first small step is to understand what that feels like in your body. What does that feel like? Naming that emotion, being able to name it. I'm feeling anger. You know, there's 5 core emotions. I think it's joy, sadness, anger, shame, and despair. I might be missing one. I usually have it written down, but if you can name one of those core emotions and then be able to name where it comes up in your body, that's the very first step to then figuring out how to regulate yourself when that's happening. So that would be the first thing. I think the next thing really is I'm really big into breath work, breathing. Breathe through it. A lot of times we want to disassociate or, you know, go to a coping mechanism that may not be healthy. And being able to sit in that emotion and understand that it's going to process through your body and to be able to breathe through that consciously, like imagining what I do for myself. I do this often, is I imagine that I'm a tiny little piece of oxygen that's just floating around in the air, and that I am going through the experience of a breath going up into my nose, down my, and into my lungs and bouncing around in my lungs, and then coming back up and out my mouth. And just by putting the intention into that breath of following that little, tiny piece of oxygen, molecule of oxygen, it can actually help you regulate whatever that emotion is. Because now you're not thinking about that emotion. You're not ruminating on whatever it is that pissed you off. You're thinking about that that molecule of oxygen, and you're allowing your subconscious brain in the back of your head to go through and process whatever that anger is.
Cool. I like that. That takes focus on your breath to the deepest level possible, probably.
Yeah.
Aaron, what's one thing you wish more men knew?
I mean, I think it goes back to my mantra in the men's groups. It's we knew how to get out of our heads and into our hearts, how to feel more, do less fixing and more feeling.
So, Aaron, how can people best learn more about you and everything that you offer?
Yeah, I've got a website at aarongambel.com. It's Gambel, Aaron, aarongambel.com. I'm also on Instagram at Aaron M. Gambel and TikTok at Aaron Gambel. I also have a free 5-step guide to rewrite your story, breaking free from the past and reclaiming your power. If anybody's interested in that, you can just sign up on my website and I'll send you the PDF.
Awesome, Aaron. It's great to connect with you again. We have so many similar experiences, good and bad. And I just recently updated my book, Still Here, How to Succeed in Life After Failing at Suicide. It's the 10th anniversary, and I've gone through and all that, so it's all top of mind. And you're just echoing so much of the things that I discovered and thought I was alone and the only person going through these things. So thank you for being you. Thank you for sharing you and getting out there and helping other men not have to go through the path that we've gone through to realize they're meant to be alive.
Thank you for saying that. I appreciate that. And I also want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to be on this podcast and to tell my story, because you never know who may need to hear it. I mean, I think that's why you and I are doing what we do, is because there is one person that may hear this podcast and it may shift for them, and they may ask for help that they may never have known how to ask for. And if one person doesn't have to go through what we went through, that is goal completed.
Yeah, couldn't agree
Thank
more.
you for the opportunity to speak here and for doing what you're doing and writing the book. And also, congratulations, 10 years. I'm grateful that you're here right now.
And I bet you're the same way. So many people will confess to me that they've made an attempt, that they've thought about it, and will say that they've never told anybody else. And you are that walking safe space.
Yes.
And other men can be too. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you for listening to Real Men Feel today. If this conversation resonated with you, I invite you to join our Authentic AF community at realmenfeel.org/group, a space for men to authentically connect, share, and grow. Big thanks to my guest, Aaron Gambel, for reminding us that when men feel safe to open up, transformation is possible. Until next time, be good to yourself.